Hi, I'm Ashley McElwain, licensed marriage and family therapist and founder and CEO of Foundation Restoration. Welcome to Foundation Restoration's Real Talk podcast, where you'll find real people discussing real issues while offering real help at the intersection of clinical expertise and a biblical perspective. We're so glad you've joined us. Hi friends, welcome to the Real Talk podcast. So excited to all be together. Always a highlight for me. I love coming together and having this time to just connect and be real with one another. I wanted to share with you a cool little story of something that I recently saw out my office window that it's amazing to me how after all of these years of working with couples and working with individuals and families and just doing the work as a marriage and family therapist, and having this ministry for almost 14 years, which is crazy to think. The other day I looked out my window and I was in here working, and I looked out and I saw a couple that had just been in here meeting with one of our clinicians, and they looked at each other, and the look on their face was just one of hope. It was one of endearment. And they held each other for a really long time. And then the husband walked the wife to her car, and they shared several kisses and again, a long hug and just such a look of endearment. And I'll be honest with you, I sat in my office and cried as I watched it, just thinking what an incredible opportunity we have here at Foundation Restoration. The lives that we're saving, the marriages that we're saving, the families that we're saving. And it was just a really cool moment. It never gets old watching people experience hope and healing or restoration or breakthroughs. It's an incredible opportunity. And even after 14 years, almost 14 years in May of ministry, really, I mean, even beyond that, the work that I've done with as a therapist before that, just watching this, it never gets old. It never gets old to see things like that. And so for those of you who support our ministry, I want to thank you for your generosity and your support. That's a story that you've helped make possible. So incredibly grateful. And if you've at all been blessed by our podcast or you really have looked into the ministry at all and you are looking for somewhere to donate, we would just really be grateful for your support. It's tax deductible. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. You can go to foundationrestoration.org/donate or just go to the website and click on the donate link. But this is the work that you get to be a part of when you donate and support our ministry. And it again, I sat here and cried for quite a while. It really moved me. And I know that if you had seen it, it would have moved you as well. And so I invite you into the work that we're doing here. It's just really, truly incredible. And there's lots of stories like that. But I just thought I would start out today by sharing that. And hopefully it's an encouragement to you. And again, it's an invitation. If you would like to support our ministry, we are always so grateful for your support. Well, the other thing I would say to you guys, I've started posting some videos on our YouTube channel. Most of it's clips from the podcast here. Also, there will be other content that we're uploading. I know a lot of people utilize YouTube, and so it's just another way to help give you resources and stay in touch with you. So if you're on YouTube at all, I would encourage you to visit our channel and to subscribe. The subscribing portion of that is what enables you to know anytime we post new content. So if you want to go to our YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/@FND Restoration, which is the same handle we use on Instagram. But go there. Make sure to click that subscribe button, and hopefully you can enjoy some of the new videos we've been posting and some of the content that we'll be producing and posting on there. So check it out, subscribe, spread the word. Again, just looking for new ways and more ways to be a blessing and encourage people all over in the different avenues and ways that people do. And also the final reminder, I would say, getting the business out of the way before we hop into the podcast, is make sure that if you're enjoying our podcast, would you take a moment and make sure that whatever platform you're listening on, or maybe even on all the multiple platforms, if you're eager, we'd certainly appreciate it. But go and rate it and leave a review for it, or at least rate it. That really helps get us in front of more viewers. Certainly if you share it or spread the word in any way, that's helpful as well. But rating it helps give us a little boost in visibility so that more people can hopefully benefit from these podcasts. So just a little reminder, make sure that you're following us, make sure that you've rated us. It certainly helps our ministry, helps with the podcast. And again, just being able to bless more people, which is what it's really about. It's not about numbers, other than just there's algorithms out there. And so the more people who rate us, the more people who follow us, the more people who review us, hopefully positively, the more visibility we get to hopefully be able to help more people. So, all right, business out of the way. Now, let's hop in to today's topic. I'd ask you this. Do you ever feel like you and your spouse are competing? Or do you ever feel like your spouse is competing with you? Like instead of being on your team, your spouse is competing against you. Not competing with you, competing against you. Does it ever seem like your spouse struggles to celebrate, elevate, encourage, support, or otherwise unite with you? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, this podcast is for you as we delve into what I call the competing spouse. As you may have known, or if you're following the podcast, we just wrapped up a 3-part podcast series on Know Your Why. Highly recommend you go back and check that all out. Again, it's probably one of the most important topics in my personal opinion. It really informs everything. So I would encourage you, go check that out as a 3-part series. We talk about Know Your Why, and I address in very specific areas. With the last one, part 3, I talked about Know Your Why in your marriage. And ultimately, to summarize it, I talked about the why of marriage being oneness. That ultimately, all of the what's of marriage come back to the why of marriage, which is oneness. And when you are one with your spouse, you are completely united. You're able to be naked in every way. You're able to be vulnerable. You're able to experience a safe place to struggle, to grow, to learn, to be loved, to be desired, to be free. There's a safety, there's a depth, an intimacy that you can't experience in any other relationship. And that oneness, which is established by God. For this reason, a husband, a man, should leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and the two will become one. So we see automatically God tells us what is the ultimate goal, what's the initial goal. Man, leave your mother and father and be united with your wife in a oneness. So oneness is a God idea. It's not my idea, it's a God idea. And that is the ultimate goal of marriage. And again, oneness is being completely known, completely naked, completely safe. And when I say naked, I don't just mean physically. I mean emotionally, mentally, spiritually. In every way, you're able to be completely open, completely raw, completely exposed, and know that you are still completely loved. Oneness is a unity that just isn't broken. And so that oneness is what enables a marriage to be set apart. It is what enables us to be able to work through things as individuals, as a couple. It is the thing that allows us to be sharpened, to be more effective for the Lord in whatever He's called us to do. Oneness is just absolutely essential in a marriage. But what happens in a marriage when you don't have oneness? When maybe only one of you is working toward that or fighting for it? What happens if only one of you wants it? What happens if you cannot find oneness with your spouse despite all of your best efforts? There's a brokenness. Maybe there never was a oneness with you and your spouse. Maybe your spouse, your husband, never left his mother and father and cleaved to you as his wife. And you've been fighting for that oneness from day one. This happens a lot. I see it a lot. And a lot of couples, there's just an ignorance. And I don't mean that in a condescending way at all, but there's just an ignorance that, like, they don't know what they're working toward. They don't know their why. And so when we talk about oneness and what that is and how to achieve that, and, all of the what's help facilitate the why. But for one reason or another, sometimes in a marriage, oneness is not possible. Maybe it's never been there. Maybe you just have been fighting for it and cannot achieve it. Again, oftentimes what we see is there's a lack of oneness when it's one-sided. There's only one person working in that marriage. And so what is the result? Division. And therefore, when there is division, there is a plethora of problems in that relationship. We look at Matthew 12:25. It says, a house divided against itself will not stand. Luke 11:17 says, every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and a divided household falls. And there's a lot of scriptures. I'd encourage you, if you just do a Google search, you can find it. There's a ton of scriptures about this. And the necessity of unity. And I'd say look up unity, look up division. And it gives a very clear picture that in general, God desires for there to be unity, certainly in the body of Christ. But he takes that to the next level in marriage and says, not just a unity, but a oneness. And so if there isn't unity, what we have is a division, and a division is a fracture that causes failure. Hear me again. When there isn't unity, there is division. And where there is division, there is a fracture that leads to failure. You cannot be successful in your marriage if there is division. Marriage requires unity to the nth degree, which is oneness. And when there isn't oneness, there isn't unity. When there isn't unity, there is division. And when there is division, there is failure. So, what happens? Well, what we end up with is what I call the competing spouse. So what is the competing spouse? Again, the root cause of a competing spouse is a lack of oneness in the marriage. And what happens when there's not oneness, there becomes jealousy. There becomes this sense of, we aren't one. It's you versus me rather than you and me. And when you have you versus me, that's where jealousy starts creeping in. And then jealousy continues to grow and blossom, and it becomes resentment. Resentment continues to grow and breeds into hatred or contempt. Hatred and contempt ultimately lead to the demise of the marriage. And we see this, Doctors John and Julie Gottman, they're two of the leading experts in our field as marriage and family therapists, in the mental health world. They have out in, now I'm getting confused, I think it's out in Washington, don't quote me on that. They have what's called the Love Lab, and they bring couples in, they record them 24/7, they're there for a time period, they're recorded, they're observed. And so tons of research has been done by them. And they talk about the 4 horsemen of a marriage that lead to the demise of a marriage, and which I'm not going to totally go into all of those right now. But the number one determining factor in whether or not a couple would make it versus getting a divorce is contempt. Contempt almost always led to divorce in a marriage. It led to failure. And I would say contempt is that highest level of jealousy. Jealousy, resentment, hatred, and contempt. And so what we see, right, you're not jealous of someone that you're one with. You are jealous of somebody that you are competing against. Couples that are one, they compete with each other, right? Like, we are together and we are facing X, Y, or Z. So again, whether that's financial strain, hey, you know what? We're in this together. I can pick up an extra job. You know what? I can do this. Let's reconfigure. I can save money here. Let's look at our budget. Let's brainstorm together. Maybe we can do a side hustle together. Maybe I can pick up a part-time job. Let's work together to alleviate the financial pressures that we're experiencing as a couple. We are experiencing as a couple. It's not, you go fix this problem. It's let's us fix this problem. Let's find a solution together. We're in the same team fighting against a common enemy for a common cause. That can be, again, with kids. Man, our kids are really struggling. This kid is really struggling. And so let's come together. Let's figure this out. Yes, here's the stated problem. Let's come together as a team. Let's work together toward solutions. It is you and me, not you versus me. We're not competing against each other. We're competing with each other. Now, this also leads to issues with being able to celebrate success or strengths of your spouse. So there's a lot to be said if you see a couple together, or so here's an example. If a spouse comes and says, guess what? At work, I had just this incredible conversation. One of my coworkers told me how I am incredible in this space. They said I'm the best they've ever seen in that space. And they're going to go talk to our boss and let them know how great of a job I'm doing, and hoping that I'll be rewarded for that. Now, the spouse who's one with in that couple, a couple that is one with that, a couple that is one, that spouse who's hearing that story says, oh man, they nailed it. You are great in that space. You're amazing in that space. What a cool, encouraging story. I hope that they do tell your boss. I hope that you are rewarded. You are so worthy of that. Or perhaps they're together and somebody says, man, your husband is amazing. Did you know that he did X, Y, and Z and made a huge difference? Goodness, that was incredible. In a couple where there's oneness, again, the spouse hearing the story says, oh man, that's a tip of the iceberg. He is such an incredible, he is amazing in that space. I got to tell you about this story where I saw him. I thought the same thing. And thanks for taking the time to encourage him. I've been telling him he is so good in that space. That's a couple that is one. Versus in those same scenarios, the spouse comes out, oh my goodness, my coworker, she told me that I was just so great in this space, and that she just was going to go tell the boss, and the husband looks at the wife and is like, either gives a look of like, and pretends they don't hear them, turns away from them. There's just such a lack of response, and there's almost a resentment of like, I don't want to hear this story. And vice versa, right? If in the example with the couple where one spouse is they're hearing about another spouse, somebody's coming up and praising them, and they're like, yeah, okay, or walks away from the conversation. There's a lack of oneness there, right? There's a competition to some degree. Couples that are not one, that are competing with, competing against their spouse. They cannot celebrate their spouse. They can't celebrate their strengths. They can't celebrate their wins. They can't celebrate the good because it threatens them. They're competing. So if they elevate you, that diminishes their capacity to beat you, to be better than you, to show you up. This same situation, spouses cannot shoulder the burdens. They don't care. They're not capable of grieving, feeling the struggle, feeling the challenges. Well, there's almost a joy of like, good for you. You deserve it. Now maybe I'll get ahead of you in this race, right? Because we're competing. So it's better if you're weak. It's better if you're down. Because if you are down, I'm up. And there's no oneness in I've got you, I'm holding you. Oh man, we're going through this together. I feel what you're feeling. I empathize. I care. I'm shouldering. I'm going through. I'm bearing the burden alongside of you. No. There's almost a joy in the burdens of your spouse because there's no oneness in it. The other thing that you see a lot of times in this situation is the weaponizing of wounds and weaknesses. And so rather than trying to cover, right, love covers a multitude of sins, love keeps no record of wrong. Instead of what happens is we begin to weaponize those wounds and the weaknesses, right? Well, you're the one who's always anxious anyway, right? Par for the course. That's how it would go. That's how it would be. You're just like, of course you did. Of course you would. There's a weaponizing of wounds and weaknesses versus a tenderness and a protection of you've shared this with me. You're vulnerable with me. And so, again, there's no oneness. Whereas typically those wounds and weaknesses in a couple that's one, right, in those situations, they say, I've got you. I'm going to protect this. I'm going to be extra careful with this. You shared these vulnerable areas. A spouse that's not one with you and is competing against you is going to push on those weaknesses, on those wounds. They know where your soft spots are, and they are going to push. They are going to squeeze. They are going to be intentional in trying to almost bring about destruction. They're actively working against you. That's another trait of a competing spouse. They're actively working against anything that you do. Instead of building you up, instead of encouraging you, instead of saying, wow, that's really an interesting idea. How can I help make that possible? Oh, wow, that's a really difficult struggle. How can I come alongside of you? Instead of having the unity and the ability to come alongside of each other and to work together, it's working against. It's undermining. Sometimes it's having conversations behind your back. Sometimes it's saying negative things about you to other people. Sometimes it can be much more damaging and insidious. Sometimes it can be much more menacing and very dark, where they're planting seeds in those around you. They're trying to cut off your support system. They're trying to intercept the positive things that you're doing or producing. Again, instead of building up, wow, you're doing a great job. I know this is really hard. You got a lot of pressure on you. How can I alleviate the pressure? How can I come alongside of you? They add to it. They compound your pressure. They push on you. They squeeze you. They want more from you when you have less to give. There's no shouldering. There's no coming alongside of. There's pushing. There's pulling. There's squishing. There's squeezing. There's hurting. There's harming. There is an active effort to work against you because we are not on the same team. We are not one. You are my competition. We don't want our competition to succeed. We want to win. And when we want to win in a marriage, when we're competing against our spouse, when we are not one with them, what happens is we both lose. There's division. And where there's division, there's failure. And what we see with this competing spouse, again, I'm tearing down. I'm undermining. There's not the ability to work with, work for. And what we see is this is true in every area. Whether it's family, whether it's finances, whether it's physical stuff. Maybe you're really trying to get fit. Maybe you're trying to run a marathon. Maybe there's some sort of achievement or goal, educational goal. Maybe there's some dream that you're trying to realize. Whatever it is, what we see is this competing spouse cannot support you because they cannot be selfless, because again, you are the enemy. You are competing against them. There is only selfishness. The competing spouse often, and I know this is a term very overused, and that's, again, a podcast for another day, but oftentimes what we see is the competing spouse struggles with narcissistic tendencies. They're very, very selfish. Everything is about me. I am a victim. Everybody's against. I've done no wrong. I'm not. They're the problem. But really what it is they're always trying to be on top. They're always trying to, it's me. I want to win. It's about me. Don't you dare look better than me. Don't you dare get encouraged more than me. Don't you dare be more successful than me. Don't you dare be more financially prosperous than me. Don't you dare have more friends than me. Don't you dare get more praise than me. They cannot celebrate others. Certainly not their spouse. Now, they may present themselves in public as caring and, it doesn't make them a monster. They can seem likable, but in the marriage, they're competing against their spouse. Selfishness, division, competition. It's the exact antithesis of what the Bible calls us to. Philippians 2:3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Humility. Go back. I did a podcast on humility. Go back, listen to that episode. Humility is essential. It is an essential component to oneness. If there is no humility, there's no oneness. Because again, oneness comes from a vulnerability. It comes from a vulnerable place. It comes from the ability to always say there's something more I can be doing. I'm not the best. I'm not perfect. I'm not here for me. I'm here for we. It is not you versus me. It is you and me. I don't need to be on top. I am fine being the frame that supports you. I want us to succeed. I'm not looking to be against you. Humility is absolutely essential to oneness. A prideful person is often going to be a competing spouse. They're not going to have the humility to say, I'm fine elevating you. I am fine celebrating you. In fact, nothing that is done for you is anything less than a blessing to me. You filled up, you elevated, you encouraged, you successful is me encouraged, built up, and successful. We're one. If somebody does something for you, they've done it for me. If you're encouraged, I'm encouraged. If you're down, I'm down. If you're blessed, I'm blessed. If you're struggling, I'm struggling. Because we're in this together. That's oneness. But oneness requires humility. Humility comes from esteeming others as better than yourself. It's because you know your why is God created me with unique gifts, talents, and treasures. I'm just a steward. I'm a manager, not an owner, and I'm here to be a blessing. I hope I'm blessed in return, but again, I'm a flawed human being in desperate need of a savior. I'm always learning. I'm always growing. I'm a work in progress till the day I die. In my marriage, that's a work in progress because we're two flawed people. We got to just work on this together. I've got you. You've got me. We'll figure this out together. And without that humility, there cannot be oneness. Without oneness, there is jealousy, there is resentment, there is hatred and contempt, and ultimately there is division and failure. We cannot experience oneness when there's a competing spouse. And I would say to you out there, if you are a competing spouse and you feel the conviction that you know you're working against your spouse, you cannot celebrate them, you cannot edify them, you cannot work with them, you cannot partner with them, you need to do some hard, heavy lifting to get to a place of humility, To realize that without humility, you are never going to achieve oneness. And if you don't work toward oneness in your marriage, you will be a competing spouse. Your marriage will fail. Even if you don't get a divorce, even if you choose to stay committed to the arrangement of marriage, you will never experience a covenant marriage with the absolute oneness and blessings of oneness that God desired you to have. Get help. Allow yourself to be wholly broken, fully surrendered, so that your marriage can be what God desired and designed it to be. If you are the spouse who is married to somebody who is a competing spouse, hang in there. It is hard. Pray specifically against this spirit of division, the spirit of jealousy, the spirit of pride. Asking the Lord to bring your spouse to a place of humility. Stand firm, have firm boundaries. It's absolutely necessary. Go find help to be supported and encouraged. Don't let them isolate you. Continue to run your race with endurance. We, in a marriage, are called to oneness. That oneness comes from a place of humility. It also comes from a place of intention. I want us to succeed. I want my spouse to succeed. And I realize that together we are better. Together we are able to help one another. Two are better than one. And when the Lord is in their midst, how much more capable and strong and fortified and effective are they? But when we compete against our spouse, we are on a race to destruction. Without oneness, without that unity, jealousy, resentment, hatred, contempt, failure. Let's fight for oneness. Let's fight to be a humble people. Not someone who thinks less of ourselves, but just someone who thinks of ourselves less. That is humility. Let's work toward oneness. I am not competing against. I am competing with. Well, friends, this concludes this episode of the Real Talk Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so glad you did. Remember, you were handcrafted by God, are dearly loved, and greatly needed in this world. We look forward to seeing you back here next time. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Real Talk. To stay connected, follow Foundation Restoration on Instagram and Facebook at FND Restoration, or visit us at www.foundationrestoration.org for more information. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to follow or subscribe and to leave us a 5-star review so more people can find our show. Foundation Restoration is a 501c3 nonprofit ministry that believes marriage is the heartbeat of society and exists to equip, strengthen, and restore marriages through clinical expertise and a biblical perspective. Please consider supporting our ministry with a tax-deductible donation at www.foundationrestoration.org. Your gift makes programs like this possible. Thank you for your generosity and partnership.